Pirates are a common theme in popular culture. Much of what we know that we understand to be a pirate comes from Robert Louis Stevenson's book Treasure Island, or more accurately from British actor Robert Newton's portrayal of Long John Silver in the Disney adaptation of Robert Louis Stevenson's book Treasure Island. And also he performed in other pirate movies like Blackbeard the Pirate in 1952, and the idea of the pirate who hobbles around on a peg leg with a pirate on his shoulder saying "Arr!" and "Ahoy, matey" largely comes from him. Your understanding of a pirate might come from Errol Flynn or Basil Rathbone or Burt Lancaster or Johnny Depp. But the discovery of a shipwreck off of Massachusetts Cape Cod in 1984 tells us much about the life of some of the most successful pirates of the Golden Age. And like many things in history, the true story turns out to be better than fiction. It's a story of adventure, of people who went on the high seas to find their fortune, of lost love, of a search for a great pirate treasure that included literally a map where X marks the spot. The wreck of the Whydah Gally is history that deserves to be remembered. Humphrey Maurice was the very model of a success story in early 18th century England. While he was born to wealth, inheriting his father's mercantile business in 1689 at just the age of 18, he learned the merchant trade from his uncle and significantly grew his business, becoming so successful that in 1716 he became a director of the Bank of England. He was also a political success, becoming a member of Parliament in 1713, where he was a tireless advocate of trade, especially with Africa. In 1715, Maurice commissioned what was described as a spectacular merchant vessel, the Whydah Gally, named after the West African port of Whydah. 110 feet long, the ship was a galley, capable of propulsion by oar, but was also fully masted with 3 masts. It was a large and modern merchant vessel with a cargo capacity, or what in the period was called tons burthen, of 300 tons. Captained by a Dutchman and former pirate named Lawrence Prince, the Whydah Gally was built for the triangular trade. The Whydah Gally would take manufactured goods, including textiles and rum, to the port of Whydah in the modern-day country of Benin. There the goods would be traded for Africans. Humphrey Maurice has since been described as the foremost London slave merchant of his time. The Whydah Gally could carry 500 captive Africans, who would then be taken on the so-called Middle Passage to be sold in the West Indies, where the ship would be loaded with raw materials, especially sugar, to be taken to Europe. More than 1 million people were taken into slavery in the triangular trade between 1701 and 1725, and the Whydah Gally was one of the most modern ships of that trade in its time. And as there was always a risk of running into pirates, she was outfitted with 18 guns for her defense. And the Whydah Gally seemed destined to make Humphrey Maurice fabulously wealthy. On its maiden voyage in 1717, the ship carried 312 African captives across the Middle Passage to Jamaica, and as a result, had reported 4.5 tons of gold and silver with which to acquire goods for the next leg of the triangular trade. But the Whydah Gally was not, it turns out, destined for the triangular trade. In February 1717, the ship was navigating the Windward Passage between Cuba and Hispaniola when it came under attack by the dreaded pirate, Black Sam Bellamy. Born in England in 1689, Bellamy had been a sailor in the Royal Navy. While it is difficult to separate fact from legend in his history, it is generally agreed that he immigrated to Cape Cod, Massachusetts around 1715, where he fell in love with a local woman, a beauty called the Witch of Wellfleet. Exactly who she was is a matter of disagreement. Her name may or may not have been Maria or Mary Hallett. She may or may not have been married. They may or may not have had an affair that resulted in a pregnancy. But it seems, whatever the story, whether to earn the approval of her parents or to acquire the resources needed to steal her from her husband, Bellamy left in 1616 to earn his fortune, accompanying a group of treasure hunters seeking a lost treasure on a Spanish shipwreck. According to legend, at least, he promised to return the captain of the greatest ship the world has ever seen, and Mary, or Maria, waited for him. The treasure hunting was, it seems, a bust, because by the summer of 1716, Bellamy had joined the crew of a notorious pirate, Benjamin Hornigold, and his first mate, Edward Teach, who would eventually become known as Blackbeard. Hornigold was a successful captain, but he was scrupulous about only attacking French and Spanish ships, apparently hoping to protect himself in case of capture by the English. That scruple proved unpopular with the crew, who mutinied, voting to replace Hornigold with a captain willing to rob anyone. Hornigold and Teach went their separate ways, and the crew elected Bellamy captain of their ship, a 10-gun sloop called the Mary Ann. Described as tall, strong, well-mannered, and tidy, Sam Bellamy turned out to be a brilliant pirate. He had a gift for strategy and outsailing his opponents so that they would give up without a fight, thus preserving their vessels. Known for wearing a black coat, from which he derived his moniker Black Sam, and for carrying 4 dueling pistols in his sash, Forbes magazine in 2008 rated Sam Bellamy as the highest-earning pirate in history. Eventually, Bellamy and his crews would take more than 50 vessels in the Caribbean and off the coast of America, and that earned an astounding sum, according to the magazine, the 2008 equivalent of more than $120 million in gold and silver. By February 1717, when they encountered the Whydah, Bellamy had captured and outfitted a second vessel in addition to the Mary Ann, the 26-gun galley Sultana. After a 3-day chase, Captain Prince surrendered the Whydah without a fight. Many of the crew of the Whydah chose to join Bellamy. Also known as a fair man who once was quoted as saying, "I scorn to do anyone mischief when it is not to my advantage," Bellamy gave Prince and the remaining crew of the Whydah the Sultana and 25 pounds silver in exchange for not putting up a fight. He then made the Whydah his flagship, adding another 10 guns to her deck, making it an impressive ship of war. Life aboard the Whydah was strangely democratic, a place where the crew were equal, regardless of race, with odd rules, such as that if there were not enough hammocks for every man of the crew, then no one was allowed to sleep in a hammock. By April, Bellamy's fleet had grown to 3 ships, with the sloop Whydah Gally joining the Whydah and the Mary Ann. On April 26, they captured another sloop carrying a load of wine, but the fleet became separated in a dense fog. The weather turned into a violent nor'easter. Possibly drunk from the wine they had captured, Bellamy and the crew of the Whyddah's luck failed. Near midnight, she was thrown against a sandbank off the coast of Cape Cod. Beaten by gale-force winds, she was dismasted, capsized, and torn to pieces by 30 to 40-foot waves. Only 2 of the 144 people aboard made it to shore alive. 120 bodies washed up on shore. Among the dead was Black Sam Bellamy. True to his word, he had come to Cape Cod the captain of a great ship, only to drown within sight of the shore where his love, the beautiful Witch of Wellfleet, awaited his return. In the aftermath, 9 of Bellamy's crew were captured. In addition to the 2 who managed to swim ashore from the Whydah, 7 from the sloop that they had captured that night had survived after it too was wrecked in the storm. They had safely made it inland, but were apprehended at a tavern, and officials surmised that they were from the pirate ship's crew. The remaining ships of his fleet survived. The 9 were tried as pirates, 6 were convicted and hanged, 2 were found to have been forced into piracy against their will and released, and a 16-year-old South American of the Mosquito people was sold into slavery. He turned out to be an unruly slave, and even he was eventually hanged in 1733. The governor of the province of Massachusetts Bay hired a cartographer to locate the wreck and recover the treasure. While looters had taken what of value had washed ashore, the wreck had broken up, and heavy objects such as the cannons and what the survivors said were 180 50-pound sacks of treasure, divvied up to be taken by the crew, were thought to have been spread out and buried by sand in the storm. But the cartographer, Cyprian Southack, made a map of the likely location of the wreck. A treasure map, where X marks the spot. In 1984, parts of the wreck of the Whydah were located by underwater archaeological explorer Barry Clifford. Despite many people's failed attempts to find the shipwreck, Clifford says that he relied heavily on Southack's 1717 map. The wreck has proven to be a trove of information about life in the golden age of piracy, and more than 200,000 artifacts have been discovered below some 20 feet of water and 20 feet in sand. In 1985, he and his crew recovered the ship's bell, which has inscribed on it the words, "The Whydah Gally, 1716. That discovery makes the Whydah the first ever pirate shipwreck from the Golden Age to be positively identified and authenticated, and the silver found aboard an authenticated pirate treasure. Among the wreckage, there appears to have been as many as 60 cannon on board, far more than the 28 guns that were mounted. This indicates that the crew had collected cannons, so was prepared to outfit more ships. Also found was a leg bone, a femur, from a child between 8 and 11 years old. That was likely the remains of a boy named John King, who had joined the crew when his ship was captured in November 1716, said to be so insistent upon becoming a pirate that he threatened harm to his mother if he was not allowed to join the crew. At the time of the wreck, he was thought to be 11 years old, something of a real-life Jim Hawkins from Treasure Island, but with a more tragic end. The Boston Globe reported last February that some more remains were found in a sand concretion, along with a pistol and cufflinks, and some speculated those may be the remains of Black Sam Bellamy himself. DNA testing, however, found that the remains were not those of Bellamy. Clifford continues to do underwater archaeology and recover artifacts from the Whydah, and speculates that there's much more still to find. He has detailed the discovery in several books, and selected artifacts can be viewed by the public at the Whydah Pirate Museum in West Yarmouth, Massachusetts. Palsgrave Williams, who was Bellamy's second-in-command and commander of the sloop Mary Ann, had missed the storm because he'd gone to Rhode Island to visit relatives. When he heard about the fate of Bellamy and the Whydah, he sailed back to the Bahamas and sold the Mary Ann and accepted a general pardon that had been offered by the British Crown in 1717, also called the Pirate's Pardon, for any pirate who promised to give up piracy. He fell eventually back into piracy, however, but retired and died of natural causes. Richard Noland, who commanded the third ship in their fleet, the Anne, also sailed back to the Caribbean and also accepted the pirate's pardon, but then he became a privateer for the Spanish. His final fate is unknown. Benjamin Hornigold, the pirate captain whom Bellamy and his crew had deposed, also accepted the pirate's pardon and then spent the next 18 months working for the governor of the Bahamas, hunting pirates. He died when his ship was wrecked in a storm in 1719. Hornigold's first mate, Edward Teach, became known to the world as the pirate Blackbeard. He and Hornigold separated after being displaced by Bellamy, and according to Forbes magazine, Teach acquired the 2008 equivalent of some $12.5 million in treasure with his own crew. Teach also accepted the pirate's pardon, but slipped back into piracy, and was killed in a fight with the British Royal Navy in 1718. Lawrence Prins, the Dutchman and previous pirate who had been commanding the Whydah when it was captured by Bellamy, went back to England and continued as a captain in the slave trade. He made several other slave voyages, but his ultimate fate is lost to history. Humphrey Maurice, the foremost slave merchant of his time, eventually became governor of the Bank of England. But it turns out he was embezzling from the bank, as well as a trust fund left to his daughters by their uncle. He died suddenly in 1731. Some think he took poison, as his crimes were about to be exposed. The wreck of the Whydah Gally well represents the golden age of piracy, a time when men and even a few women risked their lives to find their fortune on the high seas. It is ironic that a ship that was built to take people into slavery was captured by men who were only seeking to be free in a time when the line between hero and villain was not so obvious. And it is strangely ironic that the richest pirate of the golden age of piracy was taken by the sea within sight of his final port. Fiction could not have come up with a more poignant end to the story. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.